We are on lesson 39, part 2, and it's about this guy here. Do you remember his name? Julius Caesar. We got all the way to the point where he goes into Egypt and he finds out that his son-in-law Pompey has been killed by the Ptolemy, who is about 10 years old by that point, but has his generals kill Pompey, thinking that he will please Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is not pleased at all, and he starts up this huge uprising war in Alexandria. Burns down the library, a few other buildings. As the Romans come in, the Egyptians are afraid to death. And this young princess then, I would say, Cleopatra IV, wraps herself up in a carpet and has her servants bring her in to where Julius Caesar is staying. Julius Caesar gets this package thinking, what is this? And as it's unrolled, like an unrolled carpet, looks like a carpet, out comes this beautiful girl, 18-year-old girl named Cleopatra. Cleopatra then pleads with Julius Caesar, saying that her brother is actually has a conspiracy against her and is wanting to kill her, and that she did not agree with killing Pompey. She makes a deal, as only a deal she can make. She doesn't really have much of a deal to make because Julius Caesar has already taken over Alexandria, but she wishes to rule under Julius Caesar and to rule as the Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, as she is one of the descendants of Alexandra's generals. Well, what do you think Julius Caesar is going to do? And we are just sitting and we wonder, but he is mesmerized by this woman. And he decides to help her with her request and protect her from her brother. He sends out his army, and they end up in a skirmish with the Ptolemy son, and he ends up drowning in the Nile. So now Cleopatra is ruling, and now Julius Caesar is ruling sole rule of Rome, because Pompey and Crassus, the triumvirate, have died. So he is now in charge of Rome as he sees it. Well, the story goes on, and Cleopatra's allegiance goes beyond that, because Julius Caesar actually falls in love with her. And he stays there for quite a time in Egypt. And basically all of Alexandria is now, rejoicing because Julius Caesar has stopped attacking Alexandria and has become its ally or friend. So what does Julius Caesar do? Well, we know that, he has a wife. He was married twice before. One of his first wife died, and his second wife he divorced. And now his third wife, Calpurnia, he loves, but he doesn't have a son with any of them. And so as he goes, he's not going to give up his wife, but he decides to kind of take Cleopatra as his illegitimate wife. So he has two wives, and he thinks, well, I can have two wives. I'm like a god, right? Which Rome, the Roman Senate do not agree with. He comes back to Rome, and he brings Cleopatra with him. And not only that, he brings the wealth of Egypt. He brings like a parade in and shows off the world that he conquered along with this queen, Cleopatra. he brings her back. Not only that, he's so mesmerized by her that he has them build a statue of her and puts her in the temple of Venus, like she's some kind of god. So you can imagine the people probably getting a little bit upset with him. And maybe the Roman Senate is a little sick, thinking he's looking like he's going to take over Rome as the dictator. Well, it looks very well that he will be. He rules actually for it's actually a long period of time, 10-year period of time, having his 2 wives and 2 families, living partly in Rome and partly in Egypt. He thinks no problem, but the Senate during this time is looking very upset at what's going on and thinking, we need to get rid of Julius Caesar. At last, the final straw comes, and he declares himself to be dictator for life. Remember, they did not want a dictator. And if they had to have a dictator during war, it'd be for like 6 months, not for life. So the Senate, for many other reasons than that too, first, and another thing, they did not like him going to Egypt and bringing back this Egyptian illegitimate wife. In fact, she had a child of his, and she named his child Little Caesar. She figured that she would be the next in charge of Rome, and that she would be Julius Caesar's legitimate wife very soon. So we have all this drama going on here, and the Senate planning to assassinate him. It's 44 BC, and they call it the Ides of March, which means halfway point of March, March 15th. And they invite him to the Senate, probably having a big meal together and getting together. And a lot of the senators were his childhood and his friends when he was a senator. In fact, a couple of them were very close friends that he trusted with his life. As he goes in, there's 60 members that have been involved in planning this assassination. And they all together agree and stab him. He is stabbed 23 times. Julius Caesar is stabbed to death. What do you think Cleopatra's going to do now? She decides that she needs to retreat, take her son, her illegitimate little Caesar, her son, back to Egypt. Rome is in an uproar. You see, they did not want Julius put to death. Many of them didn't really like his Egyptian wife, but still Julius Caesar was their hero. And he went with them and watched the gladiator shows. And he did a lot of other, good things. He had done good things. He had promoted, helping the poor. And other things. There's quite a list of things that Julius Caesar had done to help Rome. And also his conquered lands, he was letting them actually rule themselves in some area, not like the Greeks did. He was more lenient, and he actually gave, to the poor. Not only to the poor, he helped in the farmers and a lot of different things that he did, and so they really liked him. So now what would they do? He had no heir, and they were not going to say that Cleopatra's illegitimate son was heir to Rome. They found that he had a grand nephew that he was helping raise in his household, and his name was Octavian. And Octavian stood up in the Senate and said, the Senate was actually, most of them, they all had run, but the new Senate that was coming in, that they had put together, that had nothing to do with assassination. And he basically said that every one of those senators that had been involved in the assassination needed to be executed. And he took off to make sure that he found each and every one and had them executed. And the people were very happy with this. The execution of the murderers of their hero. So what's going to happen now? Who's going to rule Rome now? Well, it goes on. I'm going to stop there because we're going to go on to the second triumvirate, which includes Octavian. Now, Octavian was about 18 years old. And all of his life he'd been pretty sickly. He'd never even been in the military. And he was kind of like a little brat in himself. But they knew that he was probably the heir to the next Caesar. Of course, he knew that he just couldn't take over, so they started the second triumvirate. And I'm going to talk more about this later. I'll give you a clue of who it is. We have number 1, Octavian. Number 2, Marcus Lepidus. And number 3, Mark Antony. We got more story to go, but I'm going to stop here for tonight because the story goes on and it's almost like this big soap opera of things that happen. But it's all the timing very close coming here to the birth of Jesus Christ. The time is set. Rome is ruling the world.